Professional baseball is back in the borough with the Staten Island FerryHawks hosting the Southern Maryland Blue Crabs in their home opener on Friday as the team embarks on its third season with eyes set on making the franchise's first ever playoff appearance.
Yeah, so I think what they were trying to do was make a splash the first couple of years. They had Edgardo Alfonso year one, Homer Bush year two, guys who are New York baseball guys who fans know as players, but they weren't necessarily guys who had a lot of experience with the Atlantic League, and that probably had something to do with them having a front office that's a lot of guys who were involved in minor league baseball. Gary Perone, the general manager, was with the Brooklyn Cyclones. So these guys were getting a feel for the league too, and I think they hit a home run this year with Mark Minikazi. He's a fourth-year skipper in the league. He knows the league. He played in the league, and it showed with recruiting this year that they kind of identified guys who they knew from the Atlantic League more so than anywhere else. And that's kind of how they built up the roster.
We definitely took a different approach on our position players this year. We basically brought in 5 shortstops, so we brought in three or four center fielders. We have a super versatile group, as you'll see in the first 2 weeks. We're in a very fortunate position where we have 13 really, really good players. So it will be... so probably the toughest thing I'll have to do is making the starting 9 every day, because we're going to have 4 guys who should be playing every day on the bench. We're bringing some pretty good talent to the island, and with the facilities we have, the ballpark we have, I think the Staten Island area deserves the best players of this league to play here.
Welcome to the Staten Island Advances from the Scene, a podcast bringing you an inside look at the biggest stories on Staten Island with the reporters who cover them. I'm your host, Erik Bascome, and this week I'm joined by Staten Island Advance sports reporter Nick Regina to discuss the start of the third season for the Staten Island FerryHawks. Thanks for joining me today, Nick. I was just telling you before we got on, this is one of my favorite recurring podcasts, one of the easiest ones I get to do all year because I love baseball, you love baseball, and it's a lot better than talking about, real estate or crime or migrants or whatever, those kind of things. It's nice to just come in here and chop it up a little bit, so I appreciate you coming on.
Well, thanks for having me, Eric, and I'm glad to talk ball with you. Definitely more within my realm than the politics and the crime stuff, so happy to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. So before we jump into FerryHawks, just kind of curious how we're feeling about the big league clubs here in New York. We got the Mets and the Yankees. Yankees are off to a pretty hot start, and then the Mets, I think a lot of people thought it was going to be a rebuild year. They look a little frisky, maybe looking for a wild card, but we'll see once we get to the trade deadline. What are you seeing out there?
With the Yankees, I think it's going to be the same story as every year, health. If they get Garrett Cole back and Carlos Rodon stays healthy and they find a way to get Judge and Soto rolling at the same time, that's a pretty dangerous group. As far as the Mets, not going to lie, I'm not as dialed in. I know people were talking about them like they were the Oakland Athletics or the Chicago White Sox or something. I don't think they're quite that bad. I think they got a shot at contending. Long season, though.
Yeah, for sure. And I can definitely fill in some gaps on the Mets front because I'm watching just about every game for them. I think the pitching has been a revelation, really. One of the best bullpens in the league. Starting pitching has performed a lot better. Former Yankee Luis Severino looks really good. Took a no-no into the 8th the other day. So he's looking good out there. The injury to Francisco Alvarez hurts a lot. The young slugging catcher for them who looked like he was maybe ready to take off this year, but he's going to be out for a while. Still waiting on Kodai Senga to get back, but the rotation's already been pretty good, so when he gets back in there, who knows, could be in for something going on, and they're a game over 500 right now, and that extra wild card spot, opens things up. So it's been exciting. It's been better than I thought it would be, I would say, and so that's enough for me right now, and like we said, what was thought to be a rebuilding year. But yeah, so let's get to FerryHawks, and so we've talked about this a couple times now. This is the third year that they are in existence. Tell us a little bit about kind of how we got here, because as most people probably remember, it was the Staten Island Yankees who were taking over that stadium for a couple decades there on the North Shore by the ferry, and so that has now changed, and tell me a little bit about how that happened.
Yeah, going back about 4 years now or so, Major League Baseball contracted a lot of the minor league teams. Mostly the single A affiliates were affected, that being the Staten Island Yankees, a pipeline to the New York Yankees. So minor league baseball is down. It's smaller than it's ever been. There's less teams and less players in minor league baseball than ever before. But with that, there's more guys playing independent league baseball than ever before, and that's helped the Atlantic League.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the Atlantic League, like we said, is in a bit of a weird spot, right? Where it's not necessarily a minor league system, but it is a professional league, but they're not necessarily associated with certain organizations the way that minor leagues are. Minor leagues, each team has a single A, double A, triple A, and they can call people up and down from those. This is still professional baseball, and they are in some ways still affiliated with MLB, right?
Yeah, it's not considered like affiliated ball where the minor league teams are direct partners with the major league teams, but they are in a partnership with Major League Baseball overall as a league. So a lot of these guys you do see wind up signing with major league organizations and wind up in minor league systems. And Major League Baseball uses the Atlantic League as they call it like a testing ground where they experiment with rules, and a lot of things like the pitch clock and the bigger bases are things that started in the Atlantic League and kind of trickled up to the majors.
Yeah, and I think that that's really one of the cool aspects of it, is being able to test these other things, because we've seen them brought to the majors, and it's, I guess, a matter of personal preference or opinion, but I think that it's worked for the most part, a lot of what they've implemented recently. The pitch clock, game times are down, which I know was a big thing for the league. I actually don't really care about the games being a little longer, so for me, that didn't make much of a difference. I'd rather get my money's worth if I'm going to the game, to be perfectly honest, but I like the things with the bigger bases, the limiting the number of pickoff attempts. You've seen really a proliferation of stolen bases in the league in a way that we hadn't seen for a couple decades. It felt like people had kind of given up on stealing bags, and now that's back, which I think is very exciting and a fun part of the game. So I think the testing of the rules and then bringing those over to the majors has been one of the cooler parts of what we've seen here. So we talked about this is their third season. The home opener, by the time you guys are listening to this, will be in a few hours. It's Friday night. But tell me a little bit about the first 2 years and what it was like kind of getting this team off the ground, building a team from nothing, and what that looked like.
Building a team, we kind of said at the time that it was more about just getting the warm bodies into the dugout than anything else. They had to find a manager, a general manager. They had to build out a front office. They had to get a brand new stadium ready to go. So I think it was more about the first 2 years, kind of just getting guys in there to fill out a roster. And this year feels different. It feels like they have a baseball team more than anything else, and they have a pretty good group up and down the roster, I think. A lot better than the last 2 years. The last 2 years were bad, to be honest. They're the worst record in the league both years. I think this year will be different from them, though. I think they should be much improved.
So let's talk about that roster a little bit. I know that there's often quite a bit of turnover here, but are there any returning players that have been there either last year, the year before, fans might remember if they head out to the ballpark?
There's a handful of guys, some guys who didn't play a ton last year but made their way towards the end of the season to Staten Island. Guys like Justin Williams and Kobe Johnson, outfielders. Steven Alameus is a guy who was here in 2022 and is back this year after not being here last year. And a bunch of pitchers are back. Christian Capuano is the big one. He's the ace of the staff. But Mark Fiello, Anthony Quattrocchi, Christian Allegretti, and William Kerwan are all guys who are back in either the rotation or the bullpen this year. And that lot is back, plus a slew of new faces.
Yeah, and so that's what I wanted to get to next, is some of those new players who have joined the team this year, including a couple former major leaguers, but one that really stands out from the rest in more ways than one. So talk a little bit about the new guys on the club.
I guess we'll start right there, then we'll jump right in with Pablo Sandoval. Obviously, he's the biggest one. He's the biggest signing they've ever had in the 3 years. Former Major League All-Star, multi-time World Series winner. This is a guy who was in Major League camp with the San Francisco Giants just a couple of months ago. So it's a guy who's not too far removed from the majors, a guy who's had a ton of success at the highest level. And he's slotting into that number 3 or cleanup spot for them this year. Plus a bunch of other former major leaguers. Taylor Motter's probably one that guys probably know. He was with the Cardinals just last year, so he's going straight from the major leagues to indie ball. But we mentioned Williams. He's another guy who has major league experience. Jason Guzman's a guy who had a cup of coffee in the majors. Mike Shawarren's an arm who people might remember a little bit with the Red Sox. And one who stood out to me is Joe Dunand, former Marlin, who's Alex Rodriguez's nephew. Those are all the major league guys, but that's a lot of former guys with major league experience for an indie league roster.
Yeah, absolutely. And A-Rod's nephew is interesting. I saw we had an article recently about, could we see A-Rod showing up at a game one of these days, which would be a pretty cool thing. But just to double back to Pablo for a minute, he was, for us in our age range, I feel like growing up or as teenagers or whatever, he was a huge part of that Giants dynasty. Like we said, they won 3 World Series in like a 5 or 6 year span. Every even year it felt like the Giants were winning. He actually has a World Series MVP mixed in there. A lot of fun to watch. Always been a fan favorite everywhere he's gone. Nickname Kung Fu Panda. I see the FerryHawks leaning into that. A little pandemonium at the stadium. They're giving out the free T-shirts, all that kind of stuff. And just, I think that a lot of people are excited. I know myself personally, I texted my buddies when I saw that signing, and I was like, oh my God, we got to get to the FerryHawks game, because he's just such a cool player that we really kind of grew up with in many ways.
And a fun personality, too. Somebody you can plug into a league like this and isn't going to take himself too seriously or come in with like, I'm a major leaguer, look at me. He's a guy who fits right in with that clubhouse, and I think with Staten Island, too.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. Because we saw last year, we had Julio Tehran come in, right? And it really felt like he was there auditioning, right? Like he was there. He felt like he could still be on a major league roster. He was still, a little younger than what we see. Pablo's almost 38 years old now. He was in major league camp with the Giants, as we said, but they gave him a little send-off after his last hit in spring training. I think that was more of a farewell tour than anything. I don't think he's here hoping to make a big league club. I think he's here to keep playing baseball, which is the game that he loves and has played his whole life. And so I'm really excited about that signing. I can't wait to get out to the ballpark. I'm going to see. One of my friends said he's going to bring some of his Kung Fu Panda merch and see if he can get a signature or two. So that'll be a fun one. But
yeah, and while we're talking about major leaguers and returning guys, there's one guy I don't want to leave out, a Staten Islander. We got one Staten Islander on the roster this year. It's Gus Sosa. A lot of people from the borough might remember him from Tottenville. He started at Moore Catholic, went on to Rutgers, wound up getting drafted by the Phillies, and he was in the minors with them last year. So he's a guy who comes back home, and a lot of people remember Gus.
Yeah, absolutely, and always cool to have a hometown kid on the team, someone to root for the fans. And I want to move from the roster now to the manager, because this is the third year of the franchise history, as we said, and it's also the third manager, right? And so we've had different managers each year. Can you talk to me a little bit about kind of that turnover that we've seen and why that might be the case, and also just about the new guy?
Yeah, so I think what they were trying to do was make a splash the first couple of years. They had Edgardo Alfonso year one, Homer Bush year two, guys who are New York baseball guys who fans know as players, but they weren't necessarily guys who had a lot of experience with the Atlantic League, and that probably had something to do with them having a front office that's a lot of guys who were involved in minor league baseball. Gary Perone, the general manager, was with the Brooklyn Cyclones. So these guys were getting a feel for the league too, and I think they hit a home run this year with Mark Minikazi. He's a fourth-year skipper in the league. He knows the league. He played in the league, and it showed with recruiting this year that they kind of identified guys who they knew from the Atlantic League more so than anywhere else, and that's kind of how they built up the roster. Probably not ideal the first couple of years, but I think they found someone this year, and speaking with him, he made it known that he thinks his experience will go a long way here.
We definitely took a different approach on our position players this year. We basically brought in 5 shortstops, and we brought in three or four center fielders. We have a super versatile group, as you'll see in the first 2 weeks. We're in a very fortunate position where we have 13 really, really good players. So it will be, so probably the toughest thing I'll have to do is making the starting 9 every day, because we're going to have 4 guys who should be playing every day on the bench. We're bringing some pretty good talent to the island, and, with the facilities we have, the ballpark we have, I think the Staten Island area deserves the best players in this league to play here.
It's kind of the same with the roster, probably, as we've seen with the manager, and that the first few years you're trying to draw fans, you're trying to get people excited, so you bring guys who had played in the major leagues in New York, and even the assistant coaches, we had Figueroa over there, right, which is a fan favorite, and the guy that had pitched for the Mets for a while. But, these are names that they thought might draw people to the ballpark, but I don't know that they were the most dedicated coaching staff. No, not trying to cast aspersions on anyone here, but it's not, they didn't have the experience. They wouldn't know the league as well. They were maybe more a little concerned with getting those big names out there than winning ball games. But speaking of winning ball games, let's talk about the playoffs, because like you said, it's been 2 years, worst record in the league both years. Right now, off to a decent start. And so talk a little bit about the playoffs. What do they have to do to get there? How does the playoffs work in the Atlantic League? Because we were talking about this a little bit off air beforehand, and it could be a bit confusing.
Yeah, let me get into the playoffs, but first I want to mention that I think Homer Bush is a great coach. I think Edgardo Alfonso did a good job too. I think those are 2 guys who no hitting as much as anyone.
Yeah.
I think it was just a matter of not knowing the league more than anything else and getting someone in there with experience and building a roster and coaching in the league. But as far as the playoffs, it gets a little complicated sometimes because it's split into 2 divisions. There's 5 teams in each, North and South, and the season is split into 2 halves. So at the midway point, records reset. So if you win your division in the first half, you're guaranteed a playoff spot. If you win your division the second half, you're guaranteed a playoff spot. Now, if one of those teams repeats as a first half winner and a second half winner, then we'll only have 1 wild card. Now, 4 teams make the playoffs no matter what. If 2 teams repeat in the first half and second half, then there's 2 wild cards. And the wild card spots go to teams with the best overall record combined from the first and second half. I know that's a little confusing.
I think I got it, but it definitely is. They might need to rewind and listen to it one more time.
So 4 playoff teams at the end of the day. If you win your division in either half, you're guaranteed a spot. And if they need the wild card spots, it goes to the teams with the highest overall record that didn't win their division.
Gotcha.
So I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does. And so let's talk a little bit about the team's performance so far and really the season outlook. So they're 3-3. They started on the road. They're coming home for the opener. What are they doing well so far? Where do they need to improve? What have you seen in those early games?
They're hitting, which is something they didn't do the first 2 years too much. But we've seen a little bit of everything. They're very athletic. They can run the bases. They've shown some pop. Sandoval went deep the other night. The starting pitching has been pretty good, too. Capuano's a stud in this league. He's a guy who doesn't have minor league experience, wasn't a big-time college pitcher or anything, and he's emerged, as Minikazi said, one of the top 5 pitchers in the league. The struggle has been the bullpen. They've blown a couple of leads. Last night it was pristine. They picked up a save in a 4-2 win over Long Island. They're 3-3 now, so creeping back to the 500 mark after losing 3 of their first 4 to begin the year. So they're coming around. But I think those arms at the back end of the bullpen will kind of tell the tale for them because it seems like they've been getting leads and probably should have a little bit better record than 3-3. But, you know, they're hanging in there and they look pretty decent.
Yeah, no, the bullpen is such a sometimes I feel like it's an overlooked part of baseball, but if your bullpen's not doing its job, it's all you can think about because there's nothing more frustrating or demoralizing for a team than feeling like you've got one in the bag and then the guys at the end just can't get it done. And so that's definitely going to be, I think, kind of a sticking point for them, especially if they are hitting, if they are getting these leads, and if they've got a few good starters out there. You just need someone to close the door at the end of it. So,
and one of the challenges for them that the manager, Mark Minikazi, brought up was that they have so many guys with past minor league experience this year, which is kind of new to them. And the only problem with that, and not really a problem because they are trying to send these guys to the next level. That is a point of pride for the league. But they have a lot of guys who might be poached by major league organizations, and they already lost their leadoff man 1 week into the season. Shane Matheny, good player, former minor leaguer, and he got picked up by the Los Angeles Angels. So
they could use the help.
Yeah, replacing Ohtani. But
and Trout now with that meniscus. I got to replace him on my fantasy team.
That's what I'm doing with Francisco Alvarez right now.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about one of the biggest promotions that we saw last year, which was the Savannah Bananas, who I'll let you describe exactly what they are, what they do, and what happened when they came here to Staten Island, because I don't even know how you would explain what that team is.
That's a great way of putting it, because so many people have asked me that question, and my answer is kind of like, you had to be there.
It's like the Harlem Globetrotters, kind of. Right?
It was like the Globetrotters on steroids, I think. It was electric. The atmosphere was wild.
Sold out, right?
Yeah,
like
12,000 to the gills. And the way they do it is they don't do assigned seating, so it's people lined up at the gate. There were people there 6-7 hours before game time, lining up on a hot day down the street on Bay Street. And as soon as they open the gates, it's a mad rush to get to a seat, and by the end of it, there's not one to be had. So it was electric. It was awesome. It's my first time experiencing it. I don't want to be the bearer of bad news, but it's not coming back this year. I've never been a part of a baseball environment like that, though, to be honest. It was next level entertainment. It was almost like a WWE/MLB game, because the competition is good, right? But the entertainment level is
Well, that's the thing. I was going to say, for our listeners who have no idea what we're talking about, you got to go look up some clips, because they're doing they're doing bits on the field in the middle of this. They're breaking out in TikTok dances. They're lighting the baseball on fire before they throw the pitch. They're doing all these silly little things, but it's entertainment, right?
Yeah,
it's not meant
they're on
to be.
10-foot stilts. They're grabbing the microphone and talking to the crowd in between at bats. They're dancing in between pitches. The umpire's dancing. It's a riot.
Yeah, no, it sounds like fun, and it was really one of the biggest events that I think that they've held at that stadium in recent years. So
yeah, like I said, I don't want to be the bearer of bad news. It won't be back this year, but it will be nearby. In September, they'll be in Philly at Citizens Bank Ballpark.
Oh, really?
That'll be as close as they'll get to us. I think they'll be up in Buffalo at one point too, but the game in Philly will be the closest one. And if you're free that day, I'd say it's worth the drive.
Yeah, it's an easy one right down 95 too. So let's talk. Obviously, we won't have the Savannah Bananas here, which I know is a disappointment for a lot of people. But are there any other big promotions going on this year? Things to look out for if you're a fan? Maybe a date to circle on your calendar, or even just other events at the stadium. I know that that's a big thing that the leadership has been looking to do there in terms of hosting more concerts and festivals and events outside of sports. So anything else going on there that people should be on the lookout for?
Yeah, I mean, one thing the FerryHawks do really well is manage their social media, and their website is top-notch. For an Indie League team, it looks like it's major league quality, the way they run their stuff. As far as the opening weekend, there's a few things going on. Friday night is like their Girl Scout night. Saturday night is their first fireworks show of the season. And on Sunday, they have a promo, kids under 12 are free. That's all just the opening weekend. They have heritage nights. Like last year, they had an Italian heritage night. They have a Jewish heritage night.
With the Gabagool jerseys?
Yeah,
those are pretty cool.
So they always have a bunch of stuff going on through the season, and I would say the best way to keep up with them is to go to their website, ferryhawks.com. They have everything listed on there. You can get all your tickets on there. All the promos are on there. I'm not privy to anything super major going on. I know they're excited about this wrestling event, micro wrestling coming in July. I think it's July 1st. That they're super excited about that, and I know it was a hot selling ticket for them. But as far as major stuff, nothing else I'm privy to right now, but the promotions are all year long. They have weekly ones, and you can see them on the website. There's a lot of stuff going on.
Yeah, absolutely. We'd certainly encourage people to check out the website and get out to a game if you can, because it is a good time. It's also one of the best views in baseball. You got the Manhattan skyline right behind you, ferry riding past sometimes. And so the stadium's decked out with local businesses selling their beers and their food and stuff like that. You got Kettle there, you've got Killsborough, you've got Hobra and Flagship and all these other local Staten Island institutions that people know and love, and you can get it at the ballpark. So the wings that I got there, better than any other baseball game I've been to.
The one knock on the Staten Island Yankees was that they didn't do a lot of these things, and that was why people didn't go to the ballpark. So the FerryHawks are doing all these things. So if you want to support local baseball, I mean, it's there. They're giving you your money's worth for the ticket. You know, there's parking lot right next door. They have everything inside the ballpark, and they're doing their best to get you in there. So
yeah, and the merch is pretty sweet too. I'm not gonna lie. I have a shirt, I have a hat, I've got everything. I didn't wear it on the pod because I thought I might be a little too biased, but people wouldn't take me seriously. But FerryHawks got some cool stuff, so check out the team store as well. So before we wrap up, I just want to see what's your best guess on how this season plays out. Any predictions in terms of will they get that first playoff appearance that they've been looking for?
Yeah, talking with the manager, I don't think he's a guy who sugarcoats it, and he thinks for sure that they're a playoff contender. The big concern, like I said, is that they lose their best guys to major league organizations. But
that probably happens throughout the league, though, right?
It does, but this year will be a year that they probably have more guys signed than any year in the past. Losing 1-2 games into the season, and I think they have a bunch more guys who have a shot to get poached. But if they stay relatively healthy, don't lose a ton of their big bats, I think they have a legit shot at the playoffs. I could see them even winning a division maybe. I think realistically they'll probably be more consistent than they will be top-end great. So I could see them getting one of those wild card spots if they keep it running all year long.
That's awesome. Yeah, and I know you'll be at the game on Friday to cover it for us, so be on the lookout for that article. I'm sure we'll have some photos from there as well. Make your way out to the ballpark if you can. I'm going to try. I don't think I can make Friday, but I'm hoping for Saturday or Sunday. But thank you so much, Nick. Like I said earlier, this is one of my favorite pods to do, so it was a pleasure having you on, and hope to have you back soon.
Hey, thanks, man. Always great to talk ball, and we'll do it again sometime.
Yep. Thank you for listening to the Staten Island Advances from the Scene. If you like what you've heard, please make sure to rate and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and visit silive.com for the latest on all these stories and more. Thank you for supporting local journalism.